Just how irrational are you? You're probably not 100% rational, but you're also not completely irrational. So which way does human psychology tend to swing? And when do we enter the heights of irrationality? So a week ago I started rereading one of my favorite books, The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. And it opens with a timeless banger, The Law of Irrationality. Greene points out how irrational you can act when cruising on autopilot. Biases, emotions, the ego, they really control your mind and not your oh-so-rational conscience. Well, fuck, the book reminded me of how true this is. I often act against my own better judgment, even in situations I know I'm irrational, where I know I'm acting against my long-term interests. Take my favorite bias, for example, right? The superiority bias. The tendency to believe that you are superior in intelligence, morals, rationality, and other noble qualities than most other people. Well, the thing is that everybody else thinks the exact same thing. And this is the ego-boosting bias that I catch myself in every single day without fail. I look better than him, I'm more confident than that guy, and they know nothing, I've got the superior view. And on the cycle goes. And the superiority bias is so lovely because it elicits positive thoughts about you, and you love thinking good thoughts about yourself. Everybody does this. It's a variation of the most fundamental bias of human nature called the pleasure principle, which is the tendency for you to entertain positive thoughts and repress negative ones. But, just how irrational are you, even when you consider yourself reflective and intelligent? I mean, you do consider yourself reflective and intelligent, don't you? I mean, so do I. And you probably think you're more reflective and intelligent than most people because you're watching an entire YouTube video instead of scrolling on TikTok. And so do I. Look, I mean, everybody thinks this way. And look, you might even be objectively right, but I'm still sad to have to disappoint you. It turns out you're definitely a bit irrational, and so am I, and so is everybody else. If you look at this example, 93% of American drivers rated themselves as above average when it came to driving skill. 2.2.2, all below the 50% mark, and the rest, 93% or so, think they're above the 50-point average mark. That's just insane. That doesn't make any logical sense. So this video isn't going to be a listicle of cute, punchy biases that you can look at and take your favorite one home with you for your next dinner talk, even though, as you already seen, I'll sprinkle them in occasionally. Look, cognitive biases take a role in irrationality, but it's minor compared to what lies ahead. Before we get there, though, we have to answer one more question, and that is, what even is rational? So the normal definition is a bit like this. Acting rationally means being guided by perfect reality and logic. This is what we call logical rationality. But this is kind of horrible news for us. So by definition, there is no human on the planet who has the capacity to be rational. This is due to a fundamental problem you'll never fix. You see the world not how it really is, but through your own eyes, senses, and brain, which is basically the most complex filter that the universe has ever invented, and therefore you're always looking through a filter. Real reality is kind of off limits, and perceived reality is all you get, and this is kind of like Japanese porn, You get a good sense of what's going on, you understand what's happening, but the details are censored and blurry. The language is foreign and complicated, and so you fill in the blanks with your own interpretations and fantasies. So useful rationality for you and me as incompetent humans has to be an achievable standard. Therefore, this other concept fits better. Perceiving reality as accurately as necessary, achieving the meaningful goals you set yourself, and using appropriate strategies to achieve your goals. This is what we call adaptive rationality. And to demonstrate the difference between logical and adaptive rationality, look at a favorite example of mine. It's this, I want to talk to this girl, but I really don't know how, and I'm very scared of being ostracized from the tribe and being left to die if I fumble problem. Yeah, I mean, the goal is clear. Talk to the girl. Is it a good, productive, adaptively rational goal? Well, yes, because the cost of not talking to her is thinking about talking to her, which would burn up your brain power until the heat death of the universe. But imagine you were able to see reality as it is. You know everything about her. You analyze her every action and mood. You calculated every single approach you could take. You know exactly how she feels about you and what seduction tactic will work best. This is what you think you'll end up by over-planning your approach. But obviously, you'll never get to this logically rational reality. Looking for more information is a bias in itself, actually. It's simply called information bias. the tendency to seek information even when it can't affect action. Or as Mark Manson put it, a smart person's form of procrastination is learning more. Here, the most rational approach is not trying to calculate every possible reality like Doctor Strange in Avengers Endgame. The most rational approach, adaptively rational approach, is to go up and say hi, right? Do the thing. Cool. So, adaptive rationality is perceiving reality accurately, not perfectly, striving towards your goals, and deploying the correct strategies to get there. Turning it around now to answer the question of irrationality. Irrationality then occurs when our behavior is mismatched with perceived reality, the environment, and our goals. But how does that usually happen? Well, there are basically two stages in which this can happen, and the first one is low-grade irrationality. And oh baby, now we're getting into the good stuff. So how does low-grade irrationality work? Low-grade irrationality basically equals flaws in our everyday thinking. And to understand this, you need to be familiar with the following. It's called dual process theory, or as it's more commonly known, System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. So dual process theory basically proposes that our mind runs on two different modes of thinking. System 2 is what enables you to be rational. It feels heavy, it's slow, it's messy, it's very deliberate, and it requires constant mental attention to run. System 2 is what you do when you actively think. But on the other hand, you have System 1. It's immediate, it's effortless, and it's permanently running. And sadly, it's also horribly naive. System 1 is running your favorite cognitive biases on loop. For example, the fundamental attribution error, which is the tendency for you to overemphasize personality-based explanations for other people's actions. For example, that guy shouted at her because he's being aggressive, while underemphasizing the role of situational influences on their behavior. For example, she was just crossing the street without looking up from her phone, and he warned her. System 1 loves being influenced by biases, heuristics, which means ignoring information, and your general mood of the day. It's autopilot. And it's rarely a good idea to take meaningful action without first consulting System 2. But System 2 is limited in capacity, inconsistently activated, and not actually rational in the first place. Even thinking very long and very hard about a problem doesn't guarantee that you'll solve it, no matter how much you activate System 2. Biases, heuristics, and mood push you towards the irrational every second of the day. Yeah, that sounds kind of gloomy in total, but it gets even worse. And this is where we get to high-grade irrationality. And this is where you're at the mercy of the animal inside yourself, essentially. Imagine any one of these basic drives dialed up to an impossible-to-control level, right? Lust, fear, pain, anger, hunger, cravings, or exhaustion. Your rational self and your diet plans fly out the window the moment you feel hungrier than anticipated. Your plan to wake up at 5 a.m. and work on your project vanishes once you're too tired and exhausted to move. Your rule to never sleep with a girl without protection disappears when you're out of condoms and this 7 out of 10 chick begs you to put it in. This isn't even just made up, this is an actual statistic you can find here. The study looked at how people responded to questions when they were non-aroused or aroused, and this is just questions. This is not the physical, actual experience you'd be in. And look down here, right? Would you use a condom even if you were afraid that a woman might change her mind while you went to get it? There's a 26-point difference in the answers. 68% of non-aroused people said they wouldn't, but only 60% of people who were aroused said they did. Basically, being horny makes you dumber. Do not kid yourself, you'll experience situations where it's hard to control this animal inside of you. Basic drives and heightened emotions can interplay viciously to undermine your rational goal-achieving motivations of dieting, working, and not becoming a dad. The twisted thing about high-grade irrationality is you know you're acting irrationally, and you still fall for yourself. This phenomenon is what psychology calls the hot-cold empathy gap. The tendency to underestimate the influence of visceral drives on one's attitudes, behaviors, and preferences. So when your satiated, happy, content, and optimistic self is setting your goals, you're relatively cold. You think nothing could deter you from your plans. But I've done unbelievably stupid shit before. Shit that was risky, hot-headed, shit that went against all my goals. And this is the hot part, right? Setting your goals just doesn't guarantee that you'll care enough to follow through 100% of the time. You know it doesn't, and we all fuck up. But high-grade irrationality can be straight up dangerous, and if you're serious about your goals, you want to limit yourself from visiting websites, going to environments, or meeting people that trigger this uncontrollable side of you. But why though? I mean, let's take a real fucking spin on the topic. Why are we not capable of being fully rational, or easily rational, or even generally biased toward rationality? Well, the answer is right here. It's evolution. Here's what we know about evolution. Natural selection rewards survival and reproduction, not who has the most accurate view of reality. And we can see this in error management theory. There are two types of errors we make under uncertainty. There are type 1 errors, assuming something exists, but it actually doesn't. For example, there's a predator, oh no, when it's only the wind. And there are type 2 errors, assuming something doesn't exist, when it does, when you think that's just the wind, when it's actually a predator. So type 1 errors typically cause a bit of cringe, like false alarm, dickhead, well done. Type 2 errors typically cause a reliably grim Reaper appearance. You weren't aware enough, now you're a predator's lunch. The human animal evolved with a bias to make more type 1 errors than type 2 errors in general, because making too many type 2 errors filters you out of the gene pool. And this is your evolution building irrationality into your hardware. But it goes even further. The types of errors you're biased towards depends on the evolutionary cost-to-benefit ratio. And a great example of this is the sexual overperception bias in men. Men tend to overestimate the sexual interest women show towards them. Men think, she smiled at me, oh my god, maybe she's interested. Why is this? Well, it's not because men are dumb. You just tend to make type 1 errors in this case, assuming that sexual interest exists, but it actually doesn't, because missing out, calling her just a friend, missing out on chances to mate with a female was evolutionarily extremely costly. Conversely, you have the sexual underperception bias in females. Women tend to underestimate the sexual interest men show towards them. Women think, oh look, he smiled at me, what a nice guy. They tend to make more of type 2 errors, so they assume that no sexual interest exists, even though it does. Because women, facing disproportionately higher investment for mating and offspring, are more careful in partner selection and need higher certainty signals from men. It's a safer mistake to make. But anyway, back to the point. Your brain, evolutionarily speaking, is not designed for accuracy or rationality. It's designed to make safe mistakes. But this is a problem, because our ancient wiring can be hilariously unhelpful in modern media, finance, self-development, and romance. And this is called evolutionary mismatch. Here's another image. You can pause the video to kind of understand this graphic. It's pretty interesting. But here's another example. I mean, why did we evolve to reason or to be rational in the first place then? Like, here's a fun theory. So, the person winning a debate often doesn't present the most logical, rational, or beneficial argument. The person winning a debate is the one who can best defend his position and is the most convincing. You see this probably all the time in politics. And as a result, the group may suffer, but the individual themselves gets power, leadership, and respect. And this is actually why both conviction bias and confirmation bias may have evolved. Confirmation bias means you tend to continually search and find evidence for pre-existing beliefs that you already like, and conviction bias is you convince yourself of and believe deeply in ideas you already like, no matter their rationality. Basically, they're default mechanisms to better defend your ideas, to give you a better chance as an individual to rise in status and power within the group, to ultimately then give you a better chance at passing on your genes. It's all about replication and survival. Also, here's the abstract I've got this idea from. It's super interesting. Here's the good news. You still have the capacity to be adaptively rational. You have system 2 thinking, after all. You have a prefrontal cortex somewhere in your brain. And you have, in other words, the ability to engage in metacognition. Metacognition is the distinctly exciting and almost Inception-esque quality to think about thinking. You can plan, monitor, and evaluate your own cognitive processes as they're happening in your brain right in this very moment. Isn't that just fucking amazing? Like, say your goal is to be liked and accepted by various social groups, right? But because you're irrational by nature, you may talk too much. Yeah, you yap. You may accidentally drop comments that hurt other people. Or you may get passive-aggressive in reaction to a comment. This actively undermines your goal to be liked and accepted by the group. And metacognition is your ability to stop yourself in your tracks, analyze what you're about to say, and evaluate if that's the right strategy to pursue your goal of being liked. It's your human ability to reason with yourself. You can apologize because you've evaluated that that's the right choice. You can start to listen and make use of empathy because it's the right strategy. And you stop acting on your impulses, you recognize when they arise, and you hold yourself back. In a sense, metacognition isn't only a very cool word, right? It's adaptive rationality personified. And yes, metacognition still has its faults. Of course it does. For example, there's the bias blind spot. It's the tendency for you to easily prescribe irrationality to others while being unable to see the same faults in yourself. It can also mean that even though you know about a bias, it's very hard to spot it in yourself. Turns out, even learning about biases and irrationality can complicate things. You start thinking you're above biases, emotions, and irrationality because you've studied it so deeply it can't possibly affect you. And whoops, can't possibly affect me. Oops, superiority bias is back. But even with faults, metacognition is still best practice daily. Critiquing your own thoughts, beliefs, and opinions, evaluating if the actions you're taking are leading to long-term goal achievement, and in the right situations, just letting go of all logical rationality and just doing the goddamn thing, as we talked about earlier. And so to arrive at our conclusion, you're not just logically irrational, but you also tend to be adaptively irrational. You automatically run fast processing, error-prone cognitions via System 1. You're vulnerable to a plethora, a true cornucopia of biases, emotions, and animalistic drives. And your brain hasn't even evolved for adaptive rationality in the modern world and instead still runs hopelessly outdated ancient imprinting. So, fuck. But you do also have the capacity to be adaptively rational, to see reality more accurately, and to achieve your goals, to deploy the right strategies. This is what we've talked about all the fucking time. You can engage System 2 consciously. You can practice metacognition on a daily basis, and you can keep distance and let emotions cool off if they do take the upper hand. So I think this is what Robert Greene ultimately meant in The Law of Irrationality. You're not supposed to be a truly logical, reality-obsessed dictator to your emotions and evolutionary programming. You're supposed to develop the capacity to observe what the fuck's going on around you and steer yourself in the adaptively rational direction. I do hope you enjoyed this week's How Deep Dive, and maybe you even learned a thing or two about your psychology. In any case, I'll see you next week. And if you've made it this far, you might as well do the thing where you click the button. I think it's called subscribe. Appreciate you, babes.